we'll do first is just take a quick sound check. The hand raise option you have, if you can raise that if you can hear us. So if you can just put your hands up there. Good, 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 excellent. So if you're either hearing us through your phone or through your computer, that's great. So let's see, hands are going up everywhere. All right, welcome to the afternoon session of the Keystone Exams Assessment Coordinator Training. Just as a reminder, if you do run into technical difficulties at some point during this training, the webinar itself will be posted on, the recorded webinar will be posted on our Keystone Exams web page on the PD website. The PowerPoint will be posted there. I've included a handout, which is a PDF of the PowerPoint in this webinar training. And you as a registrant will also have access to the webinar recording at any time. We've set this up to automatically email you links to the webinar recording. So if for some reason you get knocked off or something happens, just be aware that this recording and so on is available. We're also available to answer questions at any point in time. So if for some reason you can't get to us today, we will certainly answer questions for you at any time. You just email us directly. The webinar itself, the PowerPoint, has contact information for various aspects of the training. So as we go through the presentation, you will see contact information for specific things, and that will be available to you. And then at the end, we'll also have some general contact information. This is the Keystone Exams Assessment Coordinator Training for the winter administration. If you're a district assessment coordinator or school assessment coordinator, test administrators who may be attending this, superintendents and other folks, school principals. The idea behind us presenting it this way, in the past we've had you travel and do face-to-face meetings. We felt that we could do this remote training for you and allow you to do that from the ease of your office or wherever you might be able to sign in. And it also creates a situation where we can meet with more people in real time and just move us a little bit forward as far as how we do these trainings. Today, at the end of the training, I would ask that if you're able to stick with us throughout the entire training, we will have a presentation of a new system that we are looking to roll out for LEAs, and we have a little poll, and I'm hoping that works when I do it, to get some feedback from you. So if you're able to stay on for the whole training, when we do the question and answer at the end, right prior to that, we'll do this little poll and try to get some feedback from you. So we'd appreciate to get as many people as possible in that poll. Just as a reminder, the questions that we'll address at the end, so you can use the question box and you can type in your questions and we will address those at the end. If you have questions that you think of during the course of this presentation, some of those might get answered as we go through it. But bottom line is we'll try to wait till the end and we're going to address those verbally. So we'll probably read the questions out loud and address those. If you have specific questions that we can address at this training, we will obviously email you directly. We have your contact information through your registration. We're again focusing on administration training, so accountability questions, we won't be addressing those in this training. So I've given you the email, and I've given you, just like other PowerPoints that we've done, this is an active link that takes you to the accountability page on the PD website. When you use this PowerPoint for training, if you're DAC or SAC and you use it to train folks, you'll be able to go to a page by clicking on the link, and it'll give you that information. Just to give you some introductions, I'm Kerry Helm, and I have with me today Diane Samaska, and she'll be presenting some of this information as well. And we're the two folks who are presenting today. This is the agenda, so it gives you an idea of what we'll be covering and in what order. Just a general overview, policy, Keystone Exams, planning, participation, administering the assessment, monitoring, contact information, and then we'll talk a little about the Test Administration Management System, or TAMS. So without further ado, we'll move through this. All policy decisions come from PD, and I will make note, for those of you who've attended this in the past, most of the slides you're going to see are pretty much the same. So I do tell you up front that there has been very few changes in most of these slides. What I encourage you to do is visit our website because the most recent documents are posted there. And most of these direct links take you to, as I said, the site. They don't open documents for you because the documents are frequently updated. So I encourage you to check the website for the most recent documents. That's the most important thing. And we can address some of that later. But the documents are always in process of being updated, and we get those through PC and upload those through PNC, our office here. So like for instance, the Getting Ready presentation, we're getting that uploaded on the Keystone page today. We did have it on PSSA page. And this PowerPoint, as I said earlier, and then the documents we refer to will be uploaded to that site soon. Well, someone said about handouts. As I mentioned, we do have the handouts on the webinar. I posted it there, and I don't know how you access that, but if you, like I said, if you want to print out the PowerPoint, we will have that posted today. I did put a PDF document of the PowerPoint on. I posted it on this webinar, so I don't know how you access that because I haven't participated in one of these. I've only been a presenter, but it is there for your use. This is the contact information for the logistics with DRC. They deliver paper materials. They manage the eDirect system. They do the online test engine, and then there is contact information for them. You can email them directly if you want the document. As far as policy is concerned, the federal accountability requirements, students must take the Keystone exams at least one time prior to or during the spring administration of their grade 11 year. All the results are banked. Students who attempt the winter Keystone exams and do not score proficient or above are permitted to retake during the spring 2016 window after completing supplementary instruction. LEAs may not schedule the same content exam in both winter waves, and the class of 2017 currently still is the first class that will be required to demonstrate proficiency on the Algebra 1 Literature and Biology Keystone exams. And the link at the bottom, the PA code link, takes you to that in the PA code. Moving into planning for the assessment, resources. The following resources are available to you on the website: the Handbook for Assessment Coordinators, the RELAW Guidelines for Operational Assessments, Directions for Administration to the DFA, the Keystone Exams Test Definitions, which are the blueprints, scoring guidelines, the accommodations guidelines, including the ELL accommodation guidelines. They're both uploaded there, and I think they've both been updated. I know the L's one is the accommodation one updated for 60. Not yet? Okay. It will be soon. The PD guidance document for online testing is there, the online calculator, manual calculator policy, and the calendars. If I click on this, if you click on it, if you have the PowerPoint playing or you have the PDF document and it's online, you click on this, it takes you to the Keystone page, and you'll have access to all of these documents. In preparing for the assessment, Part 7 of the Handbook for Assessment Coordinators, that's Part 7, gives you information related to scheduling the exams, parent-guardian notifications, preparing students, preparing the classroom, extended sessions, makeups, and then the appendices include confidentiality agreements, the parent information, the code of conduct, and calculator policy documents. So when you're planning for the assessment, getting prepped to train your staff as a DAC or SAC, the Handbook for Assessment Coordinators has information that is most relevant to all of these items. And we encourage you to use that in your planning sessions. As far as participation goes, in Part 2 of the Handbook for Assessment Coordinators, you will see participation guidelines dealing with accommodations for L's, for non-assessed students, miscellaneous, students who have withdrawn, suspended and expelled students, and home education. These each have their own separate pieces of information in the Handbook for Assessment Coordinators, and we encourage you to review that information. It will give you information about participation of students in the exam. Participation with accommodations, you will find information, especially with accommodations guidelines, and I know we have in accommodations training because there's so much that is covered in the administration of the test. We have a separate accommodations training, and Diane, that is Friday?
Yes, Friday this Friday, November 6th, is the accommodations training. The information went out in a pen link to superintendents, directors of special education. If you did not get that information for that webinar, if you send an email either to me or to the email address that you'll see in this presentation for 00 testing PSU, that's the assessment address, we'll make sure that we get that registration information to you.
So in keeping with the participation with accommodations, if you're looking at read aloud guidelines, read aloud for small groups and despiraling, concussion issues, broken arms, scribing, unique accommodations, these are things we frequently get questions on, and we encourage you to look at the accommodations section and refer to that information. And if you still have questions or have additional things that you need guidance on, Diane is our primary accommodations person. Her email appears at the end of this presentation, and most of you who've filled this role as a DAC or SAC or whatever your role may be in terms of exams are probably familiar with the accommodations and contacting her and getting approvals and so on. The PASA assessment, determining eligibility. If you have questions about PASA, you would contact John Michella. And we have more information about the PASA in the Getting Ready presentation, which is posted. Some of you may have attended that. Participations with accommodations for ELs, just some basic breakdown. Participation in the EL or Keystone and Lit is optional for students in their first year of enrollment in the U.S. school. Word-to-word translation dictionaries without definitions and without pictures for math and science only. Qualified interpreters, site translators for math and science only, except for the writing prompts of the ELA PSSA writing, and we're doing Keystone here, so, and then Spanish, English versions for math and science. So I just lifted those right out of the ELL accommodations guidelines or handbook that's posted. You'll find more information about the ELLs and their participation. Basically, it's the same guidelines for the Keystone as well as the ELA. Continuing on with preparation, Part 1 in appendices, a handbook for assessment coordinators. You will also find in Part 1 and in the appendices information on training. So as an SAC and a DAC, what you do as far as training, the types of things that you're supposed to do, you'll find in Part 1 in the appendices, the roles and responsibilities that were filled, and then we'll go into some test security items, chain of custody, common violations, potential consequences, and of course some cautions. So that will take us to the rest of the PowerPoint. As far as training goes, the district assessment coordinator, you're required to attend this training, and the PD training basically gives you any new information that we have regarding test administration, and then mostly what the information we cover is pretty similar to what we've covered in the past. It's a refresher course, let's put it that way. And what your role is as a district assessment coordinator we get into in a minute. The school assessment coordinator also has training to do, and the district assessment coordinator is responsible for conducting that training. You should have an agenda, no matter how small it might be, and have them sign in when they attend that. And if nothing else, you're discussing specific items regarding your test administration, dates and times and things that for your district. The TA/proctors, test administrators and proctors have to complete the PSTAT, and that has a new domain. That's www.pstattraining.net, www.pstattraining.net. The vendor has a new vendor that's working with the PSTAT training. They're handling all the technical support, and I provided that information here for you, the number and the email. The PSTAT looks a little different. It opened on October 26th. And so if you have any questions or you're tooling around there and you run into some trouble, give them a call. There are other general trainings that take place, and we ask you to refer to the test security certification documents in the appendices and the handbook for assessment coordinators for guidance in doing general training for other people who may handle test material, whether they be secretaries, custodians who have access, or couriers and so on, people that might move materials around. Administering the assessment roles and responsibilities of the district assessment coordinator. As I mentioned earlier, attending required PD training. You're to update the direct accounts for district and school. We encourage you to review the DFA, the handbook, and the online user guides. Part of what this PowerPoint does is give you pulls out some important stuff that once you have access to the current ones, you review those. Other things you might want to cover and be familiar with for your training is reviewing your procedures for homeschooled students, and then district policy for handling the cyber charter school requests to test students. And if you have questions about that, you can obviously contact us. But again, a lot of these are decisions that you make as a district. Again, moving on with the district assessment coordinator. Again, you train the school assessment coordinators. You receive an inventory test. It's your responsibility to distribute tests to school assessment coordinators if it's a ship to district LEA. So if they ship to a central location, then you have to get them out. You collect inventory package and return them if it's shipped to district. You sign your test security certification, and then it's your responsibility to ultimately report any suspected testing violations to PDE as soon as they occur. I don't think any of these have really changed for you as a DAC from previous years.
Carrie, one of the questions we have is if I serve the role as a DAC, SAC, TA, do I need to attend all of the trainings, or is this one training sufficient? And the answer to that is you do need to attend all of the trainings. And that is because specifically, for example, this training, the training next week from DRC will be about the logistics of the test. The TA training is specific to TAs, but in order to function as a TA, you're going to have to take that training. So if you're in a situation in the small school where you serve all of those roles, you will need to attend all of the training.
We had that question before. If you function, if you're a small district and you function, anybody who administers the test has to complete the PSTAT and has to be on record. But again, what we're trying to do here is provide you with this training for DACs, and then you use this to do your trainings. And if there are other things that you need as a DAC to be familiar with, or that you obviously need to incorporate into your training, that stuff you'll need to know.
And the other question is, if I am the DAC and we're a ship-to-school district, what do I do as the DAC? And your responsibility then as the DAC, as far as its materials are concerned, is to make sure that you are communicating with your SACs regarding the shipment of the materials. If there are any problems with those shipments, any miscounts, or if they need more. So your role then would be to make sure that you're in communication with all of the SACs in your district to make sure that there are no issues or problems.
And now moving into the school assessment coordinator, again, you attend your training with the DAC. Some of you may be attending today, and that will certainly be helpful. Whatever training you'll do with your DAC would then be the specifics to your district, the dates and times and anything specific that you have as far as your district determines they want to do with test administration. Review the DFAs and the handbook for assessment coordinator, and if you're testing online, review the online user guides and update your eDirect accounts for test administrators. And then your biggest role is training your test administrators and proctors. We have a note here. This note is, I don't believe it's changed from last year. Test administrators must be a member of the school district staff. That includes substitutes, no volunteers, and student teachers may be present but may not be test administrators. That's our guideline. If you don't want the student teachers in the room, that's up to you. That's
right. And just to add to that, and it came up in the other training, is that may I use student teachers in other roles such as hallway monitors and such? Absolutely. Yeah. This is that caution and that guideline that they may not serve as a TA is in regard to that secure test material.
The TA thing is crucial because if you run into issues, how you address that with the TA and what their role is with the district. That's an important part of that. Continuing on with the school assessment coordinator, you create the testing schedule for your building, unless the DAC does that. You should include scheduling small group settings and extended time locations, assigning trained staff to supervise breaks and movements, and then be prepared for parental requests to view the test, and that must be done with paper booklets. So if you have parental requests, your district should have something in place, a protocol, a written protocol, a procedure that is then followed through, and you should be able to deal with those requests in good order. And then you also create test sessions in eDirect. So some of the roles can be dual roles or duplicate, but again, we're trying to lay out what DACs and SACs are doing. School assessment coordinator, under the direction of your DAC, you'll walk around, make sure that no prohibited materials are on your classroom or hallway walls. You get the tests either from your DAC or from DRC. You'll inventory those, and if you need additional materials, order those. Put labels on test booklets, and there's a caution, don't open them while doing that. And then, of course, you distribute tests to the test administrators on the day and time scheduled for test administration. And that's a big part of your role, is making sure that material gets out and back in good order, and it doesn't get misplaced, or it doesn't fall into an insecure situation. You are going to monitor testing sessions as a school coordinator. You're going to collect tests from the test administrators, make sure they're locked and in a controlled, limited access area. And then you'll return those to the DAC or DRC, depending on how your district works. You also sign your test security certification statement. Report any suspected test violations to your DAC, and just follow that protocol.
Now, I'll just jump in here because there was another question regarding that test security certification statement, is that the DAC does still need to sign that even if it's a ship to school district, because that certification does state that you have trained your SACs. And despite the fact that some of the statements in that test security might only apply if you're actually handling the materials, there's also other information in there that does certify that you have trained personnel in all test security protocols. So yes, you would still need to sign that certification.
All right, we're going to move to the test administrator now. We've covered the DAC and the SAC. The test administrator will attend training led by the school assessment coordinator. Part of that training, required part is PSTAT. You must complete that for this year. It's a one-time deal. You complete it once for this school year. Review applicable directions for the DFAs and online user guides for the test that you're administrating. And of course, be familiar with and follow all the testing protocols stated in the latest, or in the test security document. So again, as a TA, you go through the trainings that your school assessment coordinator offers, you complete the online training, and then just get familiar with the documents that you're going to be handling. Another part of your role is to make sure students understand the code of conduct for test takers, ensure that they are familiar with testing procedures. You should be able to answer any questions they may have about test directions. You'll actively monitor the test session, and that includes maintaining a calm, quiet environment during testing. So a lot of these things are very similar to what you've seen in the past, but a big part of what you'll see is repeated, kind of gets redundant, that your role now as a test administrator is dealing with students. It's moving from the school assessment coordinator, dealing with you, to you dealing with the students. So a lot of what you'll be trained in, and obviously, and you're responsible for, is how you administer then the test and monitor it with your students. You'll be collecting test materials as soon as the student indicates he or she is finished, and that's important to emphasize that once they indicate they are finished, you do pick up the materials, and then you'll collect and return all that material to the SAC according to whatever established guidelines they've set, and you'll sign your test security certification statement. Again, it's also you do have a expected you're expected to report any suspected testing violations immediately to your SAC. So when something happens or goes wrong, SAC should have something in place where they can get that you can contact them, either call them or send someone up to get them or whatever, especially if they need to be involved. Someone asked us earlier about cell phones. Cell phone violations are pretty simple to handle. The cell phone comes off, you use the do not score label, so on. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then you email that to PDE, ultimately the SAC, the DAC, however chain it goes through. But we get that, simply we track those types of things. So if you need help in reporting or questions about reporting, we'll have contact information on that.
And again, that test security certification statement for the TA also applies to a proctor. So if you have a person who is in addition to the room with the TA, if you have two persons in the room, the TA, the test administrator, and a proctor, the proctor also must sign that test security certification. And the SAC test security certification also applies to the principal, signs the same certification, because very often we find in many of our schools the principal also serves as the SAC. So it makes sense that both of those persons would sign that same document.
Okay, we're going to move now into test security. As far as administering the assessment and test security, one of the most important documents that you'll deal with is the PA Secure ID list distribution. This has the student name, or has the the students, the test administrator's name, the school of the year, and the subject being administered. If you have student names on yours, if you do give that to upload that or give that to PD, the names get redacted. Otherwise, because we can't have access to student names. So that's why it says student names should not be included on this list. So if at all possible, we advocate you don't include those. But that's basically, it shows the students that are taking, and this should say Keystones. It says PSSA, but it should say Keystones. It's the same thing. Must generate a list of students by the PA Secure ID, and most schools we've gone out and looked at, a lot of them are doing all these in Excel documents on your computer, and of course that's certainly acceptable and a good way to do it. You must retain these in the district or school for 3 years and be available when PD requests them.
Okay, and I'm just going to jump in here with a couple more questions, Carrie, before we keep moving along. And this is regarding the substitute and the TA. And the question is regarding can the substitute teacher be a TA? Yes, the substitute teacher can be the TA, but remember, it is your responsibility as the SAC to make sure that the substitute has been trained and has taken the PSTAT training.
All right, moving on further into test security, these are just general statements for emphasis. And I'm not going to read these in their entirety, but the first one deals with maintaining validity. So we're not deviating from assessment procedures because we're trying to make these test results valid. If you're involved in the assessment, maintain security at all times. And part of that is test administrators not having assessment materials unless they are actually administering the assessment. So these are just general statements, so we'll move on. The test security certifications that we referred to, they must be signed after the assessments are administered. We encourage you to review those before they're administered, however, so you're familiar with what's in there, but they don't get signed until afterwards.
And in fact, we do encourage you to read those certifications because those certification documents do pretty much spell out the test security issues that you should be covering in your trainings with your TAs, and if you're the DAC and you're training the SACs, it's very worthwhile to look at those documents carefully and use that as the basis of your trainings.
If you're handling anybody who has access to secure materials signs a test security certification statement. There's a general one for anybody who doesn't fit the other roles. And then the chief school administrator retains those for 3 years. So those should be on file. And don't send them to DRC. I guess we've had some issues there. You just keep those. This general statement has appeared in the PowerPoint in the past. If someone refuses, the chief school administrator must respond to PD in indicating why this person chose to not sign and then what action was taken. So that's for you as a DAC, for your superintendent, and so on to discuss. Okay, chain of custody. Tests must be secured and accounted for at all times. The DAC has to inventory as soon as they arrive and keep them in locked storage area. The SAC must inventory as soon as they arrive in the school, keep them in locked storage area. The TAs don't get the booklets until the test is to be administered, and we do require a sign-out, sign-in sheet to be used and maintained by the SAC for test distribution and collection. That's a requirement. So however you distribute tests and collect tests during test administration, you must incorporate into that process a sign-out, sign-in sheet.
And just to piggyback on the comment about that requirement of the sheet, it is required by PDE, and you must be able to present that document if you have an on-site monitoring situation for your particular school. But what that does is it really does preempt a lot of issues that you might run into with missing booklets, missing answer sheets, is that this pretty much allows you to keep track of every single booklet and every single answer sheet by using this sign-out, sign-in sheet.
Tests must be collected as soon as the testing session is complete and stored in a locked storage area. Only people who require access to tests should have a key. And when you do training, you don't give people you're training copies of the test booklets, not to be confused with a sample copy that a test administrator may have when they do the instructions to students. This is simply denoting that when you do the training, don't give test booklets to your test administrators as part of your training. We do strongly recommend that you count the tests when you collect them and distribute them in the presence of the TA. If that's, I mean, we realize that in some cases, in some larger districts, this makes it really difficult, but the concern we have here is that you don't misplace or lose test materials, because that creates a new problem. So as part of the system of sign out and sign in, counting those tests should be part of that system. And whatever you can do to expedite that and what works for you is, you know, we encourage you to include that as part of the process.
You know, we often get the question too on that issue of the demonstration booklet, because we get questions both ways. Should I give my TA an extra booklet for the demonstration? And the answer is yes, but the other side to that question is, as Carrie pointed out in that slide, but it's not to be given when you hand them their DFA or their directions for administration, because that demonstration booklet is secure test material and needs to be signed out and signed in along with all of the booklets, test booklets that are assigned to that teacher at the time of testing.
Okay. All right, we're going to move into testing violations, and we're almost to the end here. The following are examples of testing violations, and we're just giving you some examples of what we commonly get here, the phone calls or emails that we receive during the testing. One of the primary ones we get are misuse of accommodations. We get calls or emails that, hey, we had a test administrator had the student do the whole test in one sitting, all you know, both modules or something. Or they read this and shouldn't have, or they should have read this and they didn't. Again, the folks who are you know, dealing with accommodations, it's extremely important that they are aware of what the accommodations are and that they follow those to the letter. Under-proctoring and over-proctoring. The under-proctoring is someone who's not adequately monitoring the testing session, e.g. somebody walks out of the room while kids are testing and the kids are left by themselves, is an extreme example, or someone who falls asleep or something like that. Over-proctoring is someone who is doing too much, and this most frequently I you know, can get referred to in street terms as cheating, as in I'm giving kids answers or something like that. So it can run the gauntlet of you know, pointing something out to a student to someone who's actually giving them an answer. And this also can affect accommodations. If someone has an accommodation that they're supposed to provide and they actually do this in the wrong way. So those are two general terms for either not doing enough or doing too much. Obviously, changing answers or encouraging students to change answers is you know, obviously cheating. Returning test materials to students to complete or enhance answers. Once you collect it, it cannot be returned. And flipping through the test answer booklet to see what they've answered and what they haven't is, again, a violation. Viewing secure test material is always a violation. So those are just some examples of things that we get. Continuing discussing the test or test questions with students, or, you know, in one of those things, previewing material and then discussing it with other teachers, you know, prior to the next module or something.
And that's one that we do get often enough, because it's students very often after they finish the test feel the need to discuss with their algebra teacher a particular problem that they had struggled with or that they didn't understand. And so when you're doing your training with your TAs, please be very clear and remind them that they may not discuss test questions with their students.
Again, this goes back to read aloud a math question or answer choice, and doing so cues the correct answer. And there's a couple things there just keeping in mind. There's read aloud guidelines that are provided to you, and then also the cueing part of that is if you do have to read instructions or something, is you're not cueing, you're not giving them somehow, you know, through inflection or something, some kind of answer. And my general rule is the less you have to say, the better. So that's the one I encourage.
The other problem that we run into with math questions is very often math questions do involve symbols.
Yeah.
And that symbol actually may cue the student to the correct answer. And so if you're in a situation where you know you're going to be providing the read aloud, then you definitely should be using those read aloud guidelines very closely. That's not something that you would stand and train your TAs on all of those guidelines, but certainly your TA should be aware of those read aloud guidelines, particularly for mathematics, so they know the correct way to read aloud a question that does involve something like a symbol.
These other ones are pretty straightforward. Not if you don't remove or cover instructional materials or something's left uncovered or posted somewhere that students have access to it. Allowing them to possess cell phone. Oh, and just a reminder, if in hallways, if students have access to a particular hallway, just keep in mind that has to be covered. Allowing students to possess cell phones, giving content reminders to students, which is sort of like queuing or giving them, the next thing to giving them answers. Allowing them to have devices in the testing room, similar to cell phones, to take pictures, and then copying or recording any part of the secure test materials. Somebody makes copies of test materials and makes a study guide or something. So some of these seem like, for lack of a better term, no-brainers, but they have happened, and unfortunately they do result in consequences. And that's where we're moving to now. Potential consequences of violations for educators. The LEA determines these: a verbal reprimand, written reprimand, suspension with or without pay, and up to and termination. So once you've done your investigation, you determined the extent to the violation, then it's up to you as the LEA to, to determine that. And then you obviously keep PDE abreast of what you've done and what went down. And you'll work with, there's a couple of folks here at the end of the PowerPoint that we'll share with you. Revocation and certification comes from PDE, so if it's determined that something has come to that level, that's what we would do. And then, of course, criminal charges if it's something severe. Just two reminders: all personnel should be made aware of potential consequences prior to testing, and all test security violations must be reported to us immediately as soon as possible.
Okay, and one of the things that I think, Carrie, that we might want to address here before we get too close to the end and persons need to leave the webinar, but the question has come up quite often on the issue regarding the 2017 graduation rule.
Yeah.
And before some of you have to leave because you have another meeting that you're going to, we just want to make sure we answer that, is that right now, yes, we know that there has been movement in the Senate. We have not been given any indication that the House has moved on that, and so we have been very clearly instructed that we are to continue with the regulation that is in place at this time, and that is the 2017 regulation regarding graduation rates is still applied.
Yeah, my guess is if something would change to that there'd be a pen link come out fairly quickly, and that would be that's pretty big news. So that's something we'll have to keep abreast of. Potential consequences of violations for students. The do not score label is the most common, placed on the answer booklet, and the student must retake during the same administration testing window. Other consequences are determined by you, and you should make students aware of some or all the consequences or potential consequences prior to testing as part of your student prep. And of course, again, the reminder of reporting to PDE. Moving into the last few slides here, reminders. These are just pulled out of the ethical standards and the trainings that we've done. Some of the do's, actively proctoring is important, encouraging the class to check answers, trying to avoid specific help to specific students if at all possible. We know there's times that has to take place, but making general announcements as far as make sure you check your answers and and so on is certainly encouraged. Reporting prohibited actions. Do not review student test or answer booklets, as I mentioned earlier. Do not provide answers to students. Do ensure that students sitting next to each other have different test form numbers. And of course, cover your materials on the walls that relate to tested content. Either take it down or cover. Did you want to say anything to any of that? Or?
One of the questions where we say we're ensuring students sitting next to each other with different test form numbers, Typically that happens due to the fact that those booklets are already spiraled, and so two students are not sitting next to each other with the same booklet where they can read the answers easily. If it happens that the number of students in the row, it just happens to be that everybody is sitting next to a matching test booklet form, it would be permitted not to despiral, but to simply maybe start dispensing the booklets at booklet number 2 instead of booklet number 1, so that that doesn't happen. So I just want to make sure that we aren't confusing that with despiraling. The covering the walls on the material is, again, that is anything that is related to test content does need to be covered on the walls. So that students do not have access to anything that gives them instructions on how to solve problems, things not to do, things to do, as far as the content goes for the bio, the algebra, and the basically literature is reading.
Okay, and to round these out, don't obviously assist, direct, or counsel students during administrative tests in any way that influence student answers. And I think we lifted this, these couple directly from the certification statements. Do not alter, influence, or interfere with the test response in any way. Fill in any unanswered item or instruct the student to do so. Do not discuss or provide feedback regarding test items. Do not direct students to use the answer sheet as scratch paper or as a method to eliminate incorrect answer options. That can create problems with the reading of the sheet by the machines. And then do not allow students to do work in tested subjects when they finish. So those are all just reminders we pulled out, and that finishes the security portion of the presentation. Just to finish up then, a couple items. Monitoring is part of the test administration process in that we do send out monitors. We have several types of monitoring that take place. We have on-site visits, which are unannounced. And then we have what's called remote monitoring, which we piloted last year. And then we have the data forensics is monitoring that's done with, well, through data forensics. The DRC sends out reports after they've scanned tests and generate reports that then the data forensics team looks at. For documentation for on-site and remote, let me just skip forward real quickly. The data forensics, some examples of what they have access to: student erasures, how long it takes a student to answer an item when taking the test on the computer, when answers are changed and how often they're changed on the computer, and then they can do a statistical analysis of student scores and performance. So they have access to all this information, and they look at you know, irregularities and so forth and so on, and they may contact your district or whatever if they see something and want you to investigate further. As far as documentation, if you are monitored, if a monitor shows up at your doorstep, some of the things that they'll be looking for are training agendas and sign-in sheets. Those are very commonly looked for to make sure that training has taken place. That would be DAC for SAC and SAC for TAs. And then if you had them sign in when you had them attend the training. The master test schedule, including small group rosters, makeup test schedule, PA Secure ID list distribution, sign out, sign in sheet for test distribution, the test security certification documents or statements from previous years, you have to keep those for 3. Written school and district specific procedures for parents to view the test, and then parental opt-out request letters you have to keep on file. So that's not an exhaustive list, but that's a list of pretty much the documents that on-site monitors would look for when they came on site. And then before I finish with showing you the TAMS, or talking to you about the TAMS system and getting some feedback from you, this is contact information slide. We do have a general number. Additional test security contact information for Jay and Charlie. And notice Jay is rgift at pa.gov, and then Charlie. And then accommodations questions are Diane, and then monitoring and some general questions for Craig. Now, I want to talk just very briefly regarding monitoring, and I mentioned remote monitoring. We developed last year, year before last, a system where we could do remote monitoring, meaning that this system is an online system where we would contact the district and say, we're monitoring you, and upload these documents and complete these surveys. And it worked really well, we felt, and the districts that participated were districts that we monitored and chose this is the tool. This was the tool that we used. We didn't have to come out on site. We didn't disrupt testing. We contacted them prior to testing, and we said, upload these documents when they're ready, and we'll take a look at them, and then complete these surveys. And then we said, okay, that's what we needed. And in some cases, we were able to work with the school and say, hey, this didn't look quite right, or this, maybe you could do this. And so it was more of a, I see this as a three-type system. You have the on-site monitoring where we come out and it's a spot check, and hey, do you have this? And we're observing. Then you have this remote system, which is more of a we're working hand in hand to make sure you have the documents you're supposed to have and you're doing the training you're supposed to have. And then it's interviewing folks, surveying folks with a online, interviewing them in a secure system, and saying, hey, were you trained, and what type of training did you do? And then there's a blended system where we actually could have people upload documents and then still visit. We could say, hey, we've got the documents here, and we're just going to observe testing and make sure everything's working out here. So as we work through this process with the TAM system, the Test Administration Monitoring System, it just dawned on us that this would make a great management system altogether. And if we made this available to all districts to use to manage all the documents that you have to share with PDE. That list I had in the previous slide, and then the documents, we were only looking for 6 documents when we used it to do the remote monitoring, and that was basically the PA Secure ID list distribution, training agendas and sign-ins, and then the sign-out, sign-in for the test distribution. And I think also if you did online testing, the ticket, copies of tickets or whatever. So for districts, for all the things you have to manage, if you had access to this system to upload documents that PD could then look at and could assist you with, and you could archive these documents and store them, and if PD wanted to go back and look 3 years, we could do that. I guess our question is, does that sound like something you would like to use? And so what I did was I made up this poll, and I was hoping that you would respond to it, so I'm going to give this a shot. And you should see that now. And I'm going to ask you, based on what I've just shared, now we could have tried to show you some of the system today, but in the interest of time, I just figured I'd just give you a general overview of what it does. So if you had access to a system like this, is this something you think you would definitely want to use? Or no, you never want to be interested in anything like this? Or maybe, if I knew a little bit more about it, I think this is something I would certainly be open to using. So just based on that information, we're just kind of getting some feedback from you as to, is this something you think you might be interested in? So,
okay, and while you're polling, and Carrie mentioned this, and we did pilot this with about 30 districts last year. We got very positive feedback, and in fact, we've had some requests from those districts, can we access that same site again? Because what it did is it provided a very convenient and clean place to store those materials that are required for test administration. One of the features that the schools did like is that there were templates there that you could use for your PA Secure ID. There were templates that you could use for your sign-out, sign-in sheets. Not that you had to use them. They were there if you wanted to use them. Certainly some of those schools and districts had fine systems already in place, but they could just simply upload their documents into their own particular school site, their own particular district site. So that was not privy to anyone else except for PDE, because we did use it, as Carrie explained last year, as a pilot for what he referred to as remote monitoring. And so, for example, if all of your documents that you normally keep in that big binder ready for PDE to come in were actually stored here on the system, the monitor would be able to examine those documents before he or she even came to your building, and wouldn't have to ask you for a binder, and you wouldn't have to have a binder to present to the PDE monitor. The other nice thing was the fact that we were able to actually conduct the interviews via the system. Instead of what we do now is we need to, when we come into a building, we need to ask you to please locate 2 test administrators who are not being pulled out of their instructional period to come and sit down for an interview with the PDE monitor who's there in your building. This way it allows us to do that via the website, that we do not need to interrupt classroom time, and we don't need to have you running around the building trying to find someone to speak with us. So it worked very well from both the district's point of view, the school's point of view, and from our point of view. And like Carrie said, we're not saying here, oh yes, I'm going to do that, because, well, I have not seen it yet. What we're going to do here is, as Carrie was asked by the Deputy Secretary, to ask during this training which districts might be interested in it, which schools might be, was there an interest, and if there is an interest, then we'll be able to move forward with this, and certainly then we would be able to then contact you, get you in the system, and allow you access to the site to use it for your test materials, for storing your test documents. So that's just pretty much what we're doing here. We will, I see some yeses up there, and absolutely we see that you're interested in it, and what we'll do is then contact you and make sure that you know how to use the system and that you have you have access to it.
So I'm going to close this out in just a minute, and at this point, do we have any questions that we want to address?
Yeah,
early,
we do. We do.
Well, what we'll do is, just for folks here, we are recording this session, so we'll continue to record through the questions. I'm going to close the poll here in about 30 seconds, so if you'd like to vote, that's great. If not, that's okay too. I think it just gives us percentages. And then what we'll do is, if you want to stay on and for the question and answer, that's great. If not, you're welcome to sign off. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to read some of these questions out loud and try to answer those. Again, thank you for attending today, and if you do have specific questions you come up with later, do email us. Don't hesitate to get a hold of us. And if you have to sign off, keep in mind the webinar, the PowerPoint will all be posted on the Keystone webpage, and you can access that. And as registrants, you also have access to the recorded version through the GoToWebinar. So you'll get an email. I think I set it to come out in like 3 days with contact information and reminding you that this is available. So I'm going to close the poll. Thank you very much for doing this. And if you want to go with the questions.
One of the questions here is regarding homebound instruction and the test materials in the hands of a homebound teacher. So absolutely the homebound teacher is obligated to test the student in the homebound situation, just as she provides instruction in the homebound situation. The problem that we're seeing here in this particular question is, what do I do if I have a homebound instructor who doesn't go until the evening to administer the test, and then has secure test materials in her hand, and of course district offices are closed at that time. What we typically see is that every effort is made to find a homebound teacher who is available within the operating hours of the district offices, which typically stay open later than a school office, so that those test materials are out of that teacher's hands, so she does not have them in her possession overnight. If you have a situation where you have a homebound student who can only be serviced in the evening after the school is closed, then certainly you should contact PDE regarding that situation. But we do strongly encourage you to make every effort to find a teacher who will be able to return those materials. What we'll do is, I would suggest that you contact Ray Young, and he will talk with you about what precautions you should take if you've got that situation with a homebound teacher who must deliver the testing situation in the evening hours after the district offices are closed. The test security certification form, the question is, do I need to sign one for each and every one of those tests if I am the person who's administering all 3 of those tests? And the answer is no. I believe one. No, I'm looking at Carrie now. I thought it was just one for all 3 of the tests, but I do believe there was some discussion about that, and probably the easiest, because what we were talking about, what is the easiest way for you as the SAC to collect one from every teacher. So for every test administration, you should have the security document signed because it changes.
You know, it seems so redundant, but
yeah,
I can't. You know what? I can't even tell you for certain. You know what the rule would be on that, because I don't know at this point.
Yeah, well, there was some discussion about the easiest way for the SAC to keep track of that. And if you're collecting the test security certifications for the biology test, you collect them from all of your biology TAs rather than needing to go back and say, okay, did this biology TA also administer the algebra test? So what we're saying is that you should have one for each test.
I think that seems so. I mean, and I understand it seems so redundant. If once they've signed it, they've affirmed that they are going to abide by this, or they have done it. The problem is they sign it after administering. That's when they do the signature. So that's probably why we're saying that you have to do it for each one, because they're signing it after. And I know you're going to have multiple signatures on file, multiple forms, but the only thing I'm thinking is out loud that if someone says, well, I signed it for this one, but I didn't sign it for that one, you know, something like that. So it's probably, I know it sounds very redundant, best to have a form for each. If they've administered more than one test, just have them sign one for each one.
Have them sign one for each test.
Mark on each one, you know, this is the test date.
And you know, and you can explain during your training that even though it seems redundant that I'm asking you to sign 3 forms, the fact of the matter is it's much more easy to make sure from your point of view and for the TA's point of view that, you know what, I signed one after I took the test. And so there's no question whatsoever as to whether or not I signed that certification. And I think that's kind of what happened, is that we had different schools taking different approaches. And so even though it's redundant, you know, explain to your TAs, this is the best way for us to keep track of the fact that you actually did sign one, regardless of the number of tests that you administered. Again, a question about the cell phones for the TAs and proctors during the administration. We do know that we have had some situations where a TA or a proctor had some medical situations, some emergency type situations that they needed to keep an eye on. But again, that cell phone needs to be on silent if it's there.
Are you asking about
the TA
or proctor having a phone in the room?
Yeah.
There's no prohibit. We don't prohibit it, but again, you have to be aware of the general rules then regarding, you know, proctoring, is you have to be adequately monitoring, and if you do have to take a call or something, you need to have some kind of plan. If you're waiting for an emergency call or something, just have a plan so that you know that if you have to leave the room or something, that can be covered.
Exactly. So that TA should be speaking with her SAC. I've got this situation at home where I need to have my phone in case I get that emergency call. But as Carrie said, you need to make sure that there's a plan in place, because if that situation happens and that test administrator needs to leave the room, you need to have that situation covered.
And we don't prohibit them from having them. PD is not going to tell you that. If you, as a district, say, yeah, we'd feel better if you didn't, that's your call.
Right. PD is not prohibiting that. We're just putting cautions out there for everybody's sake. The online training module speaks about the handbook for secure test administration. I think that Carrie covered that. Is that that test security document? Remember, this winter Keystone is the first test in this testing season, if you will. The test security document is a separate document that simply makes it easier for you to be able to say, here's the test security information in one separate document, rather than needing to perhaps page through that HAC document. It has not been approved yet, meaning it needs to go through all of the levels of approval before it's actually posted, but it will be posted along with test administration materials when it has been completed. But you may rest assured that that information now does appear in, as Carrie said, those test certification documents, and it appears in the HAC.
Are they referring to the new,
the security.
And just in response to that, most of what you'll see in that document, having worked on it, is basically it's a separation of what the ethical standards were. The ethical standards have gone through a bit of an evolution into something that's more general, and then this document is pulled out a lot of the specifics and has addressed those in a separate handbook.
A question regarding the bubbles on the front cover. The bubbles on the front cover, the only thing that student should be bubbling in would be her name if the student does not have a pre-code label. So those other bubbles for the non-assessed student and the bubbles regarding the enrollment in a course, those are filled in by the SAC. Can you remind students to make sure they've answered all questions? That is actually, that language and those words are in the DFA. So the test administrator may use the language in the DFA to remind the class to make sure that they have answered all questions. And your TAs should be instructed to use the language that's in the DFA. Again, the whole point here is that a TA is not prompting the student or cueing the student to go back and check her answers. I'm just going through a couple more of the questions here. Will the visiting auditors know which DTC, and I'm thinking meaning DACs, attended such trainings? Will auditors have their clearances for access to the buildings? The second part of your question, I don't deal with that, but I will ask about that, the clearances. The attending the trainings, these trainings do register who is attending the training. So we do have that information for all of the trainings, the webinars that we do conduct. In fact, I think the information even gives us feedback as to who's paying attention and who's not paying attention. So we get all of that information when we conduct these webinars as to who is registered and who is attending the training. But just to further on that information, you should be keeping that information also, because you will be asked that question if you are visited. The monitor will ask you that question, and we have so many monitors out there, they don't all have this giant long list of attendees before they go out. The 6 documents that were referred to that are necessary, I believe they're all on one of those slides, Carrie, the 6 documents?
No. There's a list of documents that we had that were part of the on-site monitoring, but as a part of that list, what we had for TAMS, we reduced that to just 6 things, which was the PA Secure ID distribution list. So we had that information, and then we had training agenda for the DAC, training the SAC, whatever that agenda was just got uploaded, the SAC training agenda, whatever that was, and then sign-in sheets for the SACs and TAs when they came and met. So you had them sign in, and then the sign-out sheets for the test distribution. So those are the things that basically we asked you to upload things that that we could see training was done, and that you used the sign-out, that you had people sign things out. That was what we reduced it to as far as the TAM system.
So there were 6 documents, SAC training, DAC training, sign-in sheets for both of those trainings, that makes the 4, the PA Secure ID list, that lists the test administrator associated with the test booklet, and the sign-out, sign-in sheet. Those are the 6 documents.
And the schools that we used the remote monitoring with last year, a lot of them chose to upload a lot of other stuff because it was their page and they could put on what they wanted and they knew it was archived. So, you know, they actually used it. They uploaded a lot of stuff, and that was fine.
Sure, because remember, you've got the requirement to store for 3 years the certifications and
PA Secure ID list.
And the PA Secure ID list. So it's a really nice place to store those. The accommodation webinar is this Friday, November 6th. If you did not see that pen link, if it did not filter down to you, you may send me an email. This is Diane Samaska, or you may send an email to the 00 testing PSU edu site or web web address. That address will actually be in an email that is sent to you after this webinar. The ELL accommodations documents is listed on both the Keystone assessment page as well as the PSSA assessment page in the right-hand column. If you open up that document, you will find the requirements for ELL students. The DRC training is next week. That DRC training is regarding the logistics of test material. So you as the DAC and the SAC must attend that training. If you didn't get the information regarding that training, give DRC customer service a call and they will send that registration link to you.
Somebody asked earlier, and I was paging through your DFAs, and this is just the algebra one, algebra 1, and communicating exam information. This is done, put on the chalkboard or the dry erase board. The exam information, and then in the bold, go back to make sure you've answered each question before closing your test booklet and answer booklet. So those are your directions in the DFAs, is you're to post that on the chalkboard or dry erase board. So there, once you write that up on your board, you can refer to that at any time during the testing session. Go back and make sure you've answered each question before closing your test booklet and answer booklet. And you can, you can emphasize that at the beginning, halfway through your posted time or whatever, that whenever as you walk around, you see people starting to finish, you can say, go back to make sure you've answered each question before closing your test book. When those books start to close and you're going around and you're going to pick them up, refer them to that on the board. I mean, and before you, it's right there, so you just can point at it. So that answers that question.
It's much easier to use the language that's already in the DFA.
Yeah, so it's in the DFA. It's right there for you.
Can students still be uploaded to the DRC test session? You'll need to contact DRC. That's a pre-code label question, and that will all be covered in the training next week, but you absolutely can contact DRC now and ask them that question. Clarify on the tested subject material cannot be worked on after the test session. Does that refer to all subjects that they'll be tested in? No, it refers to the specific subject test which they are currently taking. So no algebra work during the algebra test session or after the algebra testing session. Asking how DACs and SACs are receiving credit for participating in this webinar. Again, I think I answered that, is that we do see the registration list to verify that you did participate in this webinar.
This webinar, actually, I don't know how they do it, the one part, but we know I print out an Excel document that has the registrants and has the attendees, and then it shows your participation. And I'm not quite sure how that works, but it does it. It shows a percentage, and then I print it out and I send that to Mr. Weiss and Mr. Young, and I don't know if they kicked that up to Mr. Stem or who else, but that's how we do that. And as far as credit, I don't know if there's anything else she's referring to or he's referring to.
No, and I'm not sure, but I have several emails here about the redundancy and edicts, and probably, David, it would be better if you sent that in an email privately, your concerns about, I'm not quite sure what you're referring to there.
Yeah.
Could you address the rules and guidelines for scheduling online test sessions? I'm not quite sure what we're referring to there. for scheduling them and getting the students registered, that is, you work through DRC with that. That's not something that happens through PDE. That happens through the test vendor, DRC, so they will absolutely guide you through that process.
Here. There's a guidance document that we referred to. It's on the site, and I'm showing that to you right now. Pennsylvania guidance document for online testing. So that might give you some information. And as Diane said, yeah, you want to contact DRC as far as what you'll need to go from there. But that document might help answer some of the questions.
Okay, we have several staff attending today, but only one signed into the system. That's fine, Brian. We understand that there may be more than one person in there. Just keep your own documentation as to the session that you attended. Typically, when we go out to monitor, the DAC or the SAC already has a documentation that I attended the testing session on such and such a date, so that very often they might have a PowerPoint where they took notes or whatever, but that's your own documentation that you're taking. As I said, what this system does is it does record who is actually registered in the system, and certainly if you've got other people in your room, just keep your own documentation as to the attendance.
Yeah, now somebody, keeping in mind if someone couldn't attend today or had some, these are posted. The webinar is recorded and posted, and the PowerPoint's available. So if they look at it later, again, like Diane said, you document that they've done it. So it's in their own best interest that they've looked at it and are familiar with what's in it.
Right. Last year, the accommodations materials changed in December. Are any changes anticipated for this year? I think you're referring to the updated accommodations guidelines, and and I explain this every year. The updated version will be posted with the accommodations training or soon thereafter. And very often we get feedback from the field or from other various sources about concerns, and that we might make a tweak to it and post it again. I think what you're really asking me here is, do we have any major changes in accommodations? And I will say this: for the winter Keystone test, the 2015 accommodations guidelines that are currently posted on the website, those are the guidelines that are to be used. We do not anticipate any changes to accommodations for the Keystones. For those of you that are the SAC also for the PSSA, and of course for you as a DAC, yes, there is a change that will occur this year for the PSSA test. The Keystone accommodations have not changed, and they aren't changed now. The 2015 accommodations guidelines that are currently posted on the website are current and are to be used for the Keystone administration. There will be an updated accommodation guidelines that will be posted, and there will be a change in there for PSSA, which does not occur until the spring, but it does not apply to the Keystone, even not to the Keystone spring administration.
I just pulled this up in the hack. Now, the hack that's posted on the website is 2015 spring, and the updated one will be posted, but they do have information for online testers, and someone had asked earlier about getting set up with the online test. And it says here, referring to the eDirect Test Setup User Guide, which is available, and the subject-specific online directions for administration manuals, which are on our site. So that will get you started, but there's just some information in the actual Handbook for Assessment Coordinators that you can find related to getting set up with online, and this includes more information, obviously, tutorials and the online tools training and so on.
Do test administrators have to take and pass an exam to administer the test like they do for the PSSA?
Yeah, the PSTAT is for anybody who administers a PSSA or Keystone Test Administration. It's the same training. So if they did it for PSSA, it's the same for the Keystones. And that opened on October 26th. So the first people that are obviously doing it would more likely be the winter Keystone people. So once you've done it for winter Keystones, if you do spring Keystones or if you do PSSA later in the year, you don't have to redo the PSTAT.
Is there a quick link to the accommodations? The accommodations guidelines are on the Keystone assessment page. When you go to the PDE website, you click on the K-12.
You want me to go through that, or?
I can just say it. You click on the K-12.
Okay, so you go to PA. I think I went too far. Where's PDE here? I went too far. Now it's my own page.
Agencies. Is that at the top?
All right, so if you go to the Pennsylvania Department of Education website, I'm just making sure. So if you go to PDE's website, you go to K-12, Assessment and Accountability, and then you scroll down and you'll see Keystone exams right there. Now, as far as a quick link goes, if you want to use the PowerPoint, these links will take you to the Keystone page. And I think most of these are almost all of them are all to the Keystone page. So if you click on that, it'll go straight there. And the Keystone exams page has, the PSSA actually has a separate link for test administration material. The Keystone one has the administration materials right there. So you got your read aloud guidelines, your handbook, you got your DFAs, you have your accommodations handbooks here, and then you have your testing calendars, your assessment update. I think that's old. I wouldn't even, that's a newsletter that DRC puts out. This is the one I opened earlier, and then this is a link I put on there for eDirect. So that'll take you to eDirect, and you can sign in there if you have a login or sign in. I don't, but for this eDirect site, it also contains documents too. So you can go on here, and you can look up
Winter Keystone,
which is in here right here. And I would just leave all if you want. And there you go. So they have it. We don't yet, but they do. There's the samplers and manuals and
online directions.
Online directions. This has everything. User guides, professional development stuff. There's the second page here. So eDirect is a quick link from that site, and I think it's also linked in my PowerPoint. It's let me go up. I think it's a couple places. But if you have the PowerPoint or the PDF, right there, that'll go right to eDirect. And you can either, like I said, you can log on if you have a log on, or you can just go to Documents, and you can pick what you want, and you're good to go. Well, there you go.
Can students read for pleasure after the literature test? The answer to that is yes. Of course, they shouldn't have cliff notes or anything else that might provide insight and answers to questions regarding the novel that they're reading, but certainly, yes, students may read for pleasure after the lit test. I mean, we realize that there's, you can argue the fact that it's the subject area, but the fact of the matter is we're not giving them questions and answers to their questions and inferences and insights into the text. So it's not an instructional text that they're reading that has insight in it. It's simply reading for pleasure. Another concern about capturing people who are viewing the PowerPoint, if only one person signed on, I think I answered that. It's okay.
That's okay.
If there's more than one person in the room with you, Brian, we're not concerned about that. Just keep your own documentation as to the persons who are attending the training with you.
That's fine.
And if you're at somebody else's building or at an IU viewing the training, that's fine. Just keep your own documentation that you attended the training. Do our junior high and senior high test set schedules need to match? No, that's not necessary. That's, of course, a local decision if they're both in the same building. I'm sure you're doing some coordinating there.
keeping in mind that it could be a test security issue, though, because once, if kids take it in the middle school and then they take, so there is a test security issue, but that's a local decision to do it or not.
Right, and I don't know if you could hear Craig's response to that. Craig stepped into the room now, and that there could be a test security issue if you've got totally different schedules and students might share information on that Algebra 1 test with each other. So be careful of that, but sometimes you don't have a choice because you've got two separate buildings with two separate schedules and things going on that the schedules do not match. Another concern about students sitting next to each other with the same form number. It's not a rule, so don't look for a rule for that, Todd. It's simply that it's not a good practice to have students sitting next to each other with the same test form number so that they can easily look at each other's answers. If we have middle school students that did not pass the Algebra Keystone exam last year, could they take the retest in the same session as our high school students? The answer is yes. When is the PSSA and Keystone accommodations training again? Again, that is this Friday, November 6th. Send me an email so that I can send you a copy of the pen link if it did not filter down to you. The Getting Ready document on the Keystone site is still listed for 2015. We're aware of that. We've notified the web office. We're waiting for them to change that. But you can go to the PSSA page, and that Getting Ready is the 2016, the one that we recently presented. And that's the one that we've requested the web office to change it on the Keystone page. Also, we apologize that that has not been done. We're doing our best to get that changed for you. But go to the PSSA page for the Getting Ready presentation if you're looking for it. And that's the end of the questions, Carrie.
Okay, well, I appreciate your attendance today. And like we said, if you think of other questions, don't hesitate to email us individually. As Diane mentioned, the Getting Ready will be updated, and added to this page will be this webinar and the PowerPoint, and those should be up hopefully in the next day or two. They have to go through our press communications office, and then they upload those. And also, you should be getting a notification, an email to you about the webinar recording, and I believe that was a 3-day thing, so that we would make sure that everything would be uploaded. So appreciate your attendance today, and have a good day.
Thank you.